with that, let's get on with the program. I'm going to introduce Mayor Fritz May from the Center, and the cast of thousands will introduce themselves, as I understand. Okay. Welcome,
Thanks,
sir.
Bob.
Congratulations on 150 years.
Thank you. I'm almost there. My wife did remind me as we were crossing Perinton Street that I'm halfway towards 150. So, well, I don't know if that was necessary or not, but she did. Well, our program is entitled Then and Now, and a group from our Sesquicentennial Committee put this together, and hope you'll enjoy it. We're going to take various parts, and I told everybody else to do this, and I didn't do it. So anyway, thank you for coming this evening. We appreciate your coming to help the village kick off its Sesquicentennial. And it's only the beginning now. I'll tell you more about what's coming up the rest of this month. But for now, let's start this. Whoops. Okay, this is just a slide showing a map of 1858 Fairport. And you can see that it was not terribly large over here. And then that's a picture of 2017 and the difference in the size of the village. You know, we need to back up a little bit. We're all the way up to 1858, but we really began as two log cabins back in the late 1700s. We had one up on the South Main Street Hill, one on the North Main Street Hill. And in between, we had swampland, we had quicksand, and we had bugs and mosquitoes and diseases and all kinds of things. So that's the way things were as we began, but as the canal started being dug, it drained that swamp, it got rid of the bugs and it got rid of the mosquitoes, and it dried up the land, and it was much easier now to connect the north and south together, and we could begin to come as more of a community. The cabin that was up on the north end of the village had about 64 acres of land that it grew various things on. Then there was a large one up here on the South Main Street Hill that also had a large farm that came all the way down toward the canal. So those were the two existing farms back at that point. And we put this slide up because if it wasn't for George Washington, we probably wouldn't be here. He's the one who really had this idea of making a passageway from the Hudson River all the way over to the Great Lakes. He actually had his hands on a survey, and you can see the price he paid for it up there. And then, of course, it didn't go anywhere at that point. Thomas Jefferson became president, and during his second term, George Washington went to him trying to get funding so that he could build this canal, and Jefferson wasn't in favor of it. And so he said, no way. He nixed it. And if you're reading this up here, you can see he said maybe in another 100 years somebody will come forward and do that. So 1817, DeWitt Clinton decides to run for governor, and he runs on the platform of building the canal. He won, and so construction started, and that was really the beginning of Fairport as it developed into the community we know today. This is just a map showing the Perinton area up here and the main routes that went through to connect the east-west, north-south. The north-south was particularly important for transporting goods from one place to another. And this map is showing, if you follow the red line down, that's Perinton in this whole configuration of blocks that were settled. Okay, this, we were starting to come along now. You know, 1822, we were beginning to grow and activity was beginning to take place. The canal had reached this area, but no further. So we began to get some shipping type ideas going, but then it was dug further, and people, instead of stopping here so much, passengers, cargo still stopped here, but passengers went on to Fulham's Basin. And at that point, they left the ship. The hotel down there was appropriate for them to stay in overnight if they wanted to, and then they took a stagecoach into Rochester. That only lasted a very, very short time before the canal continued on into Rochester, and so then people no longer needed to stay overnight. That hotel is now next to Dial-A-Tire. I think many of you know that that's where the library started, and they moved big buildings like that without thinking twice. By 1823, the community was really bustling at that time, rapid growth taking place, and that continued around the canal until the trains came through in 1852. That took a lot of the transporting that was being done on the canal to the railroads because, again, it was faster than the canal was and cheaper. And so the canal really slowed down, but it was the canal that got us going. It was the economy or the economics of the canal that made New York State grow. But then the trains followed along the canal because it was flat, and they took over from the canal traffic itself. All right, so then in 1825, you see that activity was taking place down at Fulham's Basin. And then by 1827, the political activity was all moved into what is now the village of Fairport. At that point, it wasn't really called a village yet. Then things kept developing and developing and developing, and oh wait, that's too far. Go back here. Did we get ahead of ourselves here? 1845 map. Okay, that's all right. And here we have an 1858 map, and you can see Main Street, and you can see Cherry Street over here. And this is actually into Bonnie's talk. So let me go back a little bit more.
Keep going, keep going.
Okay. In the 1820s, we were considered a hamlet. We weren't considered a village yet at that point. And we had 1 square mile in size. We're now 1.6. But we were spreading that much. So you can see where our growth actually took place. And then in 1822, which I think Bonnie's going to talk about, the first frame house was built, and that's the Parse House on the corner of Parse Avenue and North Main Street. Was a grand house at one point. The growth in Fairport with passengers needing hotels and restaurants and bars and other activities that went along with those things. Storage buildings were created, many inventions were done, and as I say, I just keep saying this, but the community kept growing and growing and growing. The activity was almost non-stoppable. So by 1866, it was almost out of control. It was going so fast. And the town of Perinton, who was overseeing all of this area, was now saying, we can't do this anymore. It's too big, it's too active, too much is going on. So a meeting was held at Shaw's Hall. A number of residents and important people gathered to talk about the idea of maybe separating the village area into its own community or village. And so in that meeting, they talked about the pros and the cons and when they should, why they should. And then a vote was taken, and they actually decided that maybe it was a good idea to do that. So we did, and then that meant all the papers had to be filed with the county and the state, and all the dots and things were done. And then in April 30th of 1867, we finalized that whole agreement, and Fairport became an official incorporated village. So that's my part, and now we're going to move on to the next. Who's that, Barb? Next? Okay, just...
a lot easier when he did it. I know. That's the problem. Thank you. As you see, here are two pictures of Parse Avenue. The one on the left was taken about 1870, and the one on the right is present day. So the first wooden home was built on Parse Avenue, and today, Parse Avenue, we find Trip Hammer Brewery and the Iron Smoke Distillery taking up residence. So the Parse Avenue actually went from private homes and is now more a commercial area. Whoops, went too fast here. Okay, all right. On the right-hand side is Joseph Yale Parse, brother of Medvera Parse DeLand, and his wife Lucy Mead Parse. He owned 64 acres of land just north of the railroad tracks. You can see in the circled area there. And around 1872, he became a partner and operated the Parse and Soley nursery and garden business on the property. So it changed its appearance. Okay. And then we have a picture of the Parse home in 1916, which is in its heydays. You can see on the left-hand side here. And then on the right-hand side is the home as it is today. Pardon?
Where is it?
It's still there.
Yeah, it's the Parse house that's on the corner of Parse Avenue and North Main.
Okay.
She says, Jason, I should tell you, it's the yellow vinyl sided.
Our next slide tells us more about what took place on Parse Avenue. What now appears to be one continuous building on Parse Avenue is really a series of buildings. One of the most recent businesses housed in the building was a company known as American Can. However, before there was, it was the can factory, it was 3 other businesses along the way, as you can see, and most especially the last one on the slide is the Peacock's Shoe Company manufacturing plant. It was, at one time, it was the second largest shoe factory in New York State.
So, hello. Hello. I'm Bonnie. Calzaleo. I think that Fritz made us say our own names because he can't pronounce my last name. That's our joke. So anyway, we went from Parse Avenue, and now we're on this slide. Does anyone recognize? Oh, is that the wrong slide? Yeah, I got to go back one. I didn't go to the preparation class this afternoon. I was working. So All right. No, you're right. That's it. So that's our slide. Does anyone recognize that building? No? Yeah. So I just think it's fascinating that the Cox shoe factory was located in the country in Fairport to get away from the unions. So if you read that slide, it talks about some of the union members and the 21 shops. I figure you all can read, right? So, don't you think that's kind of funny that they left? Did that work well for them? I don't think so. So, all right. The next slide is the Parse Avenue. Here I go with this thing. I don't know. There it is. Parse Avenue warehouse factory building in the early 1900s ended up actually being 21 connected buildings by 1984, and that's the same year that the American Can Company left. So, and I think that Barb talked about some of the businesses that are already have reestablished in that building, including Trip Hammer's Briar Works and the Iron Smoke Distillery, some of the newer additions. You seeing that? Okay. Oh, look, I did it right. Or did I? So, North Main Street, the Whiskey Flats Hotel District. So why do you think there's such a concentration right there? I thought it had to do with the hotels and the bars. No, I don't know. But it's the railroads, right? So interesting architecture. It kind of reminds me of this one of New Orleans on the corner.
There was a train station in Fairport.
That was the train station?
There was one.
Oh.
On North Main Street.
Okay. Is it
To the railroad tracks.
is it still there?
Just east of the railroad tracks by 100 feet.
Okay.
No longer there.
Oh, it's not. So I've only lived here a year. Aren't you proud of me? And that's my husband back there, and he's proud of me too. So, any other additions to this slide that you'd like to talk about? You folks know a lot more than I do. Hey, what do you got?
Upper left was the Osborne House Hotel, I think.
This?
Yes, and then next to it was next to the right.
Oh, to the right. Okay. I can't move over there. I'll hang myself. Okay. Okay.
On the left? No, those two are the two buildings closest to the tracks on the west side. So one is, no, actually one is Tanglefoot, and the other is gone. The one closest to the tracks is gone, and the other is T-Foot's.
Okay, do you recognize Ryan's Bar? Anyone? It's up in the middle, I think, where the guys are all hanging around the bar. Do you see it now? Okay, moving on. Let's see if I get this right. Oh, just too heavy on that. So this is South Main Street, West, and then Cherry Street. So Fritz just said, point out Main Street and Cherry Street. West Avenue now. Gee, that brought a lot of chatter. It's not called Cherry, it's West. I like Cherry Street. That's a nice name. Okay, moving on. This is the photo. Who knows the photo on the left? Does anyone recognize that? Okay, so that's before all the paving and all the new construction, and now look what we have, then and now. So, urban renewal, yes. All right, I'm giving up my mic.
Hey folks, my name is Jim Hafner, and I've got probably the shortest presentation here tonight. I'm going to talk about or show you a little bit of, if I can get it up here. Not showing? You make her up. Okay. There. Anybody recognize where that is? You know, Fairport has got a lot of activity goes on throughout the years. And it went on way back when, too. This was the Chadwick Schomer's block. Later changed in the century, in 1900s, to what's now called Packet Boat Drive. But in the old days, they had a lot of fun down there. It started out originally back right after the Civil War to be developed. The first one was a lumber yard. Moved in there within a short time, burned to the ground. Seems like a lot of stuff around Fairport burns. Anyway, as it turned out that the ownership changed from Chadwick to Schomer's, and Schomer's sort of had a good time renting that out for activities. One of the things we used to use it for was circuses, and then later on to other activities that involved athletic events. And then back in 1916, it went into what was called the Firemen's Convention. And boy, those guys had a good time. They had a parade, of course, which we continue to do, and then races, fireman races. I don't know what they did back then, but I'm sure they must have been good. I'm sure the beer flowed too. And then they had a big dinner. But one of the biggest attractions that it turned out to be was a guy by the name of A. Johnny Mac. I thought he was a cowboy. I remember him as a kid. But he was a showman. And he brought in a big hot air balloon and was going, had raised it up. And it was called a Daredevil. And apparently it was a pretty big balloon. Anyway, he got up there pretty high. And old Mac, he was dangling from beneath the boat, or beneath the gondola. And then he had to parachute down. And that was pretty much of a delightful thing for all that crowd. So as that area turns out, when I should say that's where I live now, is in the Packet Boat Drive area. And to hear some of the history that goes on, or that went on back in the old days. This is after the canal was built, of course, and that area was used for dumping the fill, or dumping the material that they cut out. But I had heard, of course, by that time too, it was drained and turned into a residential area. Okay. Got it. Get up high.
Okay. Okay, we've talked a lot about the growth and how Fairport grew because of the canal. People came, a lot of new businesses were here, things that were here. They didn't want to be downtown. But when you have growth, what do you got to have? Food. So I'm going to talk about groceries. And I'm not going to talk about then and now. I'm going to talk about now and then. So today when you go to buy groceries, you go to Wegmans, you go to Tops, right? You get your meat, you get your vegetables, canned goods, you get your drugs, get your prescriptions, cakes, ice cream, anything you want. You just go in, one-stop shopping. You go in, you buy it, take it home, you're good, right? Okay, now let's go back to then. Then you had to go to probably 5 places to get all of that stuff because all those commodities were in a different store. So we'll start with the grocery stores. Now let's see. Yeah, there we go. Okay, A.B. Parker was probably one of the early Fairport grocers here. And he had a store down where the DPW was, which is now where the brand new big high-rise condominiums are on the canal. And it was Parker's warehouse. He sold his business. He did own property on the north side of the canal, which is Parker Street Bridge is located, and probably the bridge was named after him. Maybe, maybe not.
And the street too.
And the street too. There you go. Okay, then we move on to Goodell and Aiken. They were probably the first grocery store here. They were on the east side of Maine, which burned down. You're going to hear a lot of that. Second store was in the Sealy block. And you're going to hear a lot about these grocery stores. First it's one person, another person, and another person, another person. There's different stores. They keep moving and burning down and being bulldozed. They later became Hart's, then Celino and Howe followed them, and then they became the Snow and Parse department store in 1833. Okay, now we've got A.C. Hooker, and this is just great. I love this little saying in here. We're known as the one-horse grocery. We like to be called the one-horse grocery. We acknowledge that we are the one-horse grocery. Everybody knows why we're the one-horse grocery, and their trademark is one horse. Kind of cute. You can see the price of some of the goods that they sold there, but you know, the salaries were commensurate as well. And this particular picture is hanging up in Tops grocery store today. So if you're in there getting your groceries, look for the picture. It's right on the wall behind all the cashiers. Okay, then I'm going to kind of go through these because there's a lot of grocers that came and went throughout here. This O.C. Adams, he added like salted meats, fish, oysters, and seasonal produce. We're assuming the oysters were canned because I don't know how they'd have got fresh ones up here at that time. And then his store moved on to several other grocers, and finally Tony Pintanero Shoe Repair was there until 1975. Then the Fairport Market Basket was originally occupied by a bank, later A&P, and then it became a car wash. B.J. Woolsey and Son, they used to store fire equipment in their store on the Schumer block. Then they moved their store to West Avenue and specialized in spices and coffees. His family lived on the second floor, and they offered fancy groceries, canned goods, fruits, butter, and eggs. Sold the business, and thereafter more grocery stores occupied that building until it was finally raised in the 70s for urban renewal. Okay, then there was W.J. Moore. He had fancy groceries, and he added baked goods and prompt delivery. The Schilling Groceries also were an agency for several coffee companies, and you could now phone your order in. How unique, right? And have it delivered. And then there's just a list you can read down through of a lot of the other grocery stores that came in. Some of them added drugs, dry goods, clothing, and things like that. So everybody had kind of like a little extra niche in their store, a little extra commodity to attract the customers. Competition was great. Okay, then we move on to meat markets. Now this is your second store you're going into. You got to have meat. James T. Jennings not only was a grocer, added fish to his market. Saturday nights he sold hot dogs and popcorn for the dances that were held in the street. Several other things occupied his building, and he was also a stockbroker. So a lot of these people are very entrepreneurial besides being whatever their main store was. Okay, then we move on to George Filkins. Ernest and Alan Filkins managed the store for him. He later moved across the street. Then John Webb's Meat Market was on West Avenue. Fresh and salted meats, again, he's got oysters again, fish and poultry. The Rush Meat Market. And I like this little saying here, and as to groceries, let me show you. So he had a pretty good store, apparently, according to his standards. Lowest prices for quality goods. And the Hollander Root, they were on South Main. Prime Western Beef, how they got it here, we don't know. Home, there weren't trains. The canal really didn't go out very far out west. And home dressed poultry and pork. Okay, store number 3, you got to have baked goods. So we had George Stubing's Bakery and Ice Cream Parlor. Now, what was interesting about this building in the back of it, Goodell's moved their cocoonery. They had a business down on the, was it north of the railroad tracks on the east side? Wasn't where he was raising the silkworms and that. And, and then this later became a school in the back where the cocoonery was. And then it became Smith, Morey, and Dudley's Bakery. Okay, then Borden's Bakery, first floor of the Shaw Hall. And I think a lot of the pictures over on that wall are of the Shaw Hall that you might get a better look at. And then there's some lists of some of the other bakeries that were also in Fairport at the time. Okay, the fourth place you might have to go is to ice cream and candy, the Candy Kitchen. This was run by George Varlin, and he was in the Chadwick block near the canal. In 1911, they moved to the Clark building, and in 21, Nikita Christo and his wife, Florence, bought the business. They later bought the Clark block, and then the Moose Hall, which was on the third floor of the Clark block, of course, was used for dances, the Moose meetings, church meetings, basketball games, things like that. It also housed the Harwick store, and then Nick Messerino's grocery store, which a lot of you know, 1960s, he was in there. The Fullman block was removed on this site in order to build the Clark block. And later on, it also housed Abe Taylor's barber shop and Estes drugstore. Okay, now you're getting kind of tired, but you've gone to 4 stores. You still got another one, where's all my notes, to go to. There we go, our drugstores now. So this is your 5th stop of the morning. There was Bramer's drugstore on the Sealy block. Big stock, quick delivery, downtown prices. We satisfy our customers. Upstairs was the Bell Telephone offices. And this Dr. George Price had his offices upstairs as well. He was the one that was here when the, was it the Serto building, chemical building burned? And he took care of a lot of the patients from that fire. And again, here's another store that was bulldozed for the Village Landing. Then we had the Smith, Morey, and Hodgkins drugstore. Now he had also, besides his drugs, was chemicals, and now he's got liquor and prescriptions. So the block, he actually joined his pharmacy to his home, and in 1865, he was bought out. In 1880s, they held the first switchboard, and the Morey and Sons Dry Goods was operated there for 75 years. And I say that because a lot of these stores weren't in existence for 75 years. They were up, down, had different ownerships and things like that, but this one, 75 years. And they were bought out by a department store. And there's a name some of you will remember as Hupp. He started out with a drugstore and then later became Hupp Motors. And he's got every article is guaranteed to give satisfaction or will refund your money. And he also sold ice cream. And Hupp Motors was down further on South Main, but the building where his drugstore was, that was also raised for the Village Landing. Wagger Drugs was in the Bound block. He bought the block, and in the 40s, it was considered one of the most modern drugstores that there was. And of course, his store was also raised because of the urban renewal. Then there was Estes Drugstore, which he touched on a little bit ago, but he also was into real estate and insurance, and he was in the Bound block. Now we come to Dr. Weir's drugstore. He lived in Fairport for quite a while and left. He came back in 1872 and opened up his drugstore, but he also established a patent medicine factory and made veterinary medicines like heave powder and conditioning powder for cattle and horses, louse killer, and poultry powder. You can't see the pictures very... Veterinarian. Yeah, but he was probably also a pharmacist in order to open his drugstore, so that's probably how he went from one to the other, possibly. Okay, and now we're going to bring Bonnie back on.
No applause necessary.
There you go.
Now let's see if I pull this off. So I get to talk to you about the fire halls and the firehouses in Fairport. So look, she did that for me. She must have known. So if you read those lines, I can add some things to it. For instance, in 1877, the fire department, as such, would consist of at least 75 good, durable buckets, a suitable number of ladders in place, and a place for the safe storage of those things. It was hoped that this would that the taxpayers would help out with this cause. Then, just a few months later, in March, or a month later, it's February, March, Levi DeLand created the DeLand Fire Company, and its main goal was to protect the chemical company. So a subscription was started for property owners who lived on or near the main corners of the village to purchase about 200 to 300 feet of hose, and that was attached to the steam pumps from the chemical works. Then a couple months later, they had a ball. Can you believe they had a ball? They had a dance to raise money. I would like to go to that. I think that would have been fun, to raise money for the first hose cart. And then in September, a couple years later, in 1881, it refers to the Hook and Ladder Company, number 1 was formed. And the purpose of that company was to raise ladders and light the area at night. So the hook and ladder men must surrender their hose to the hose company member upon arrival. No walking away with those hoses, right? So, did I do it right? I didn't. Darn. I did. Okay, in 1884, that's where we are now, the hook and ladder truck and equipment was stored at the Schumer's block of West Avenue. And the truck was hauled by a farmer's team of horses, and the first person to arrive at the Schumer's block was responsible for the hose and ladder truck. I bet there was a lot of competition for that job, don't you? I'm thinking. Neither company ever owned their own horses. Then in 1886, so this is a nice little activity. The Hook and Ladder Company ruled to conduct drills every Wednesday and Friday evening at 9 in the evening. So no member was excused for any reason, none, other than illness. Well, okay. And any member who wasn't present had to be fined 15 cents. And that was raised to 25 cents in 1887. Yeah, that was a hardship. You better go to those meetings. So then in February of 1888, the purpose of the Protective Association, I guess it does explain itself. The purpose of this was to restrain the crowds from, I guess, removing, maybe stealing stuff if a property was burning down. So yeah, how about that? And then the last line, the February 3rd and 4th, at that time the water was obtained from the Thomas Creek and the canal for the fires. 8 years earlier, a public demand for water had been discussed by a private water company, but that idea failed. So in 1885, they had a village board meeting, and they are franchising to supply pure and wholesome water to the village of Fairport. So that's progression, isn't it? All right, let's see what happens. I did it. No applause again. So in 1904, there's the village, and there's the fire truck, too. Look at them. So the hook and ladder truck was stored at Brown's Block on South Main Street. And then 1910, they wanted to combine the three companies, and it was the sentiment that if that became necessary for the companies to own property, they would incorporate as a department. So they had to, I guess, buy some land. And then prior to 1916, the fire alarm consisted of one general blast of the fire whistle, and then I guess there were 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on which district the fire was in. So that's a nice little system. And in 1917, a 3-bell whistle was placed on trial and purchased, thus forming the box location system. Then in 1919, guess what they bought? A Brockway truck. And I'm from Cortland, so that's my connection. Brockway was, I don't know if any of you know that, but Brockway fire truck was big in Cortland. And my husband used to work for Salisbury fire truck. So maybe that's the reason I got this part of the demonstration. I don't know. Karma. So in 1922, the original hook and ladder truck was remounted on a motorized Rio chassis. And that's the end of my presentation. So it's nice meeting all of you. Hey, don't eat the hardtack. I made it. Oh, I do? I don't want to. Oh, I thought I was done. I wanted to be done. Well, you don't have to applaud again. I'm a comic relief, seriously. So now I'm on the two-fire whistle thing. Hold on there. Hold on to your seats. Okay, 2 fire alarm codes. Do we really need this part? Okay, I'll do it. In the early days, there was a steam whistle located at the DeLand Chemical Works. The whistle would be blown using a code to indicate the location of the fire. As more streets were added, the village code became more detailed. Somebody dropped out of this program. That's why I got more stuff. Sorry. Oh, okay. Or did I do that? Did I do a quick one? Yeah. Oh gosh, in 1923, that's where we are now. Hey, we've moved up a few years here. A few years later, the village received its Class A fire insurance rating. At this time, the entire department was motorized. A new hook and ladder truck, I wonder if that was a Brockway, and a 3-tank chemical truck and 350-gallon pumper and 1,000 feet of hose were purchased for $11,000. Reduced premiums over the years have more than offset the cost of the for the taxpayers. And then more progression. And then in the 70s, the Stewart Station at Whitney Road and East Street was built for the cost of $2,300. Somebody read that for me. $230,000. Thank you very much. And in 1977, the new Stanford pumper was 342, that's what it was called, was purchased for $88,000. And maybe you know this lady, I don't. Her name's Debbie Terwilliger, but I love saying her name. Does anybody know her? Debbie? She was the first female to join the fire department. So let's applaud Debbie, not me. Okay, I think I'm done now. No? It says end right there. No? Oh, shucks. Oh, I have to do these. Oh, they're kind of cute. Okay, we like these. I like these. See, this is really your comic relief. Okay? So, the chief's trumpets, before radios commands the entire scene, was given by the chief. Other uses for these trumpets were carrying flowers. Oh my gosh. Oh golly. Ugh. You know what? I think I didn't want to read this one. In remembrance of the deceased, banquets, the narrow end was plugged and used for drinking. What? Drinking what? And they were engraved and given to the retired chiefs. Well, I guess it's a nice souvenir. Am I done now? Thank God. Okay, inventors. This is the part I really wanted, inventors.
I'm not sure I know how to follow an act like that. Aren't you glad that one of us doesn't talk a lot? I'll just share with you that if I was in my profession, which is clergy, I would be talking and you would wish that I wasn't saying as much. Fairport is known for having a lot of inventors throughout history. And this inventor, as you can see, his name is Joseph Yale Parse. It's very interesting. He developed, invented the derrick, and the first patent was issued to Fairport. This invention I found very interesting. You'll see it on the right-hand side there, that it made it possible for them to load the boats on the canal. He made you can see what he made, what he invented there, which was quite an improvement to the way that they were loading the boats and unloading them. He also held 2 patents designed specifically to improve efficiency in the DeLand Chemical Company. So he was a very talented man and made some big innovations. Whoops, wrong way. This is Dr. Willis Trescott. He came here and started a dental practice, and then he co-owned Trescott Brothers, an apple dry house in Canisius. And after a while, he left the dentistry and went into invented collaboration with Harrison J. Wooden, a carpenter. They invented a fruit evaporator to fit inside of a large brick drying chimney. And in 1934, he patented a fruit cleaning machine, which was a series of hard bristled brushes that was suspended over a conveyor belt. A modification of this also removed the fuzz from peaches. Isn't that an interesting? How many of us would wish we had that today? And then there was Robert Douglas. Now anyone who does canning will like what his invention was. From 1913 to 1917, he invented the process by which pectin, which is found in apples, could be concentrated through, we don't, okay, I should read up there, right? I can't see, the light isn't good here. But anyhow, through this process, it would come out a syrupy liquid. So anybody who does any canning knows how important that was. And when you use the liquid, it would help you to cook fruit, and it would make it into gel. And all of us like gel, right? So we have to be grateful for him. And I think that's the last. I do short times here.
All right, so we grew the town, founded the town, grew the town. We had a lot of factories grew here, came out from the city. We fed the town. We protected the town. Well, now what do we got left? The Postal Service. Okay. So I'm going to do this as then and now. This goes way before Fairport became a village. And you can see, I'm not going to read through all of this, but you can kind of see the history of what your mail has gone through from 6 to 8 weeks that it used to take to get you mail. And you had to pay for it. And there were no envelopes. They were sealed with wax. We had our, if you remember very early in the presentation, we talked about Fulham's Basin and they had the general store there. Well, that's also where the post office was. And the post office, just like the grocery stores, moved and moved and moved and moved. Okay, now, once Fairport became a village, now we got free mail. It's in 49 cities along the railroad. We've got, of course, we've got the railroad too, so now mail's moving much faster. And as you'll see here, we had free rural delivery. The post office moved again. This Hans Hansen saw the need to have the delivery service, so he took it upon himself to get the approval, talk to people, take his civil service exam, and did so for numerous years until the automobile came out, and that led to his retirement because he didn't have the money for the automobile. The second route was established actually when the Egypt Bushnell's Basin post office had closed. And I think the last one's a hoot. When you read what a mail carrier actually did besides delivered the mail, notified patrons that their cows were out, you know, they delivered the doctors, carried service, and the best part is they did the local gossip. Okay? It wasn't always about the women. Sometimes the men gossiped. Yeah. Okay. Home delivery began in 1913. And in 1916, the post office moved again. In 1938, we dedicated the post office on Main Street, which is where the Sherwin-Williams paint store was. And then it moved to Aralt Road. And then in 2001, of course, we added the post office down in Perinton Square, which used to be Perkins. And as you can see from 1851, when postal rates were only 3 cents, and then they went way down to 1 cent, and then back up to 6 cents back in the 60s, we really haven't, it hasn't gone up all that much up to 2017. Well, it's only 47 cents, so it went back down 2 cents again. So that's with the postal rates. And that would be the end of what I have to say, and Fritz is going to come back on and give you a little wrap up and tell you some additional information about the activities that we have coming up for the Sesquicentennial.
And I think the statement right now is that's our story and we're sticking to it. Anybody have any questions that hopefully we could answer? Comments, okay. We brought our expert in case we get really stumped. Jean?
I thought the first house was on East Church Street, or was that a log?
Not according to all those different things I checked. Let me tell you, it's interesting to go through the history of Fairport because depending on who wrote it, depends on what happened. And when I was trying to get a piece ready on the history of Fairport, I found 2 or 3 different options. So if I found it twice, I used it. According to what we were told, after the log cabins, the first one was the Parse House. And I believe the second one was the Sparbeck House? Spurbeck? I think that was the second one, and those were the 2 large farms then. Bill?
I was just asked about that a couple days ago, and the cop-out response that I gave, because I told some people I hate to speak in absolutes too often, but once a sawmill was built and you could have sawn lumber, I think a lot of people were racing to build a house. So probably there were several of those early houses came one right after another because you had sawn lumber.
Well, and you see that the Parse House was 1822, so it was the beginning of our real rapid growth. So money was there because of the activities going on, and you saw that house and the size of it. So couldn't build that today for what they paid for it, I'm sure. Well, I wanted to tell you that we have some activities coming up. Right now we have a scavenger hunt going on. It started on the 14th of April, and it goes until the 29th of April. You can download it as an app from Goose Chase. And if you can't do that, then you can go to the Village Hall or you can go to the library and get a hard copy of it to follow. As of a couple of days ago, we'd had 44 picked up. We just took our third delivery of hard copies over to the library. And the Village Hall is going to have to replenish now too. 7 had already finished. So either it was a great weekend or it's too easy. We're not sure which.
What are you looking for?
You have to pick up the paperwork or
What's it sending you to find? Buildings?
all kinds of history. All kinds of history. It's really a discovery, have fun, learning more type thing. Then on April 29th, so that's next week, we are going to have an 1800s baseball game on Saturday, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's been changed, probably until about 4. That's going to be at JP Baseball Field. Fire department band's going to play. They said they didn't know any Civil War type music, but they're going to play baseball type music. And then we're going to have a concession stand, kind of an old-fashioned concession stand. The Rotary is going to run a large section of that. They're going to have peanuts and popcorn and lemonade and water. And then the police department's going to be there with hot dogs. So that'll be in the afternoon on Saturday. Then on Sunday, April 30th, we're going to have at 1 o'clock in the afternoon at Potter Park a pop-up picnic. And think back, a pop-up picnic is one where you bring your own picnic. And it's going to be on the basketball courts. We'll have a hard surface. There'll be tables and chairs there. So it'll be an easy picnic on you. You can bring lawn chairs if you want to, if you think they'd be more comfortable. We've asked the, yeah.
Potter Park? I thought it was Perinton Park.
No, Potter Park. We're keeping it in the village. Yeah. So come to Perinton Park. Don't go to Perinton Park. Come to Potter Park. Okay, a letter's gone out asking all the churches to ring their bells at 1 o'clock on that Sunday, April 30th. 2 things. It'll help us to kick off the events of the afternoon, plus it's also the way they used to draw attention to announcements that had to be made. So hopefully everybody will jump in and do something on that. Then, after we eat, we're going to have a number of things. We have the Fiddlers of the Genesee coming to play, and we have the Smugtown Stompers coming. Stumpers coming. And we're going to have old-fashioned games that are going to be on for a while. We are going to announce the winners of the scavenger hunt at that time. The Friday is Arbor Day. So the tree board is going to be at the picnic to talk about trees and Arbor Day activities. And the last I heard is they're going to have all the materials that the Arbor Day Foundation sends so that you can pick up usually they're posters and bookmarks and that kind of stuff. So you're able to do that. So all of these things hopefully we're going to be kind of related to 1850-ish Civil War type time. Then, when that's all done, we are going to be selling baseball caps. We have these caps up here that kind of cool. So they're going to be sold. They're $10 a piece. They're on the table, and I'll take care of you if you want one tonight. Later they will be up in the gift shop. And then we have stickers and clings out on the table that you can pick up and take with you if you'd like, and it'll help us to advertise this event a little bit more. We have a Sesquicentennial booklet coming. It's going to have some history in it and advertising from local businesses. And it's going to have a few recipes that are Civil War type recipes. None of them have been tried. But we figured anybody willing to try a Civil War time recipe has got to be game for whatever it is. They're interesting because, even if they're just reading material, they're interesting because so many things don't line up with the way we do anything today, including ovens. And then the big thing right now is the museum has created this ornament as a commemorative of the Sesquicentennial. And they're in the gift store upstairs. And these are $10.80, including the tax. So they're pretty nice. Yeah, it's the logo. Yeah, it's the logo of the Sesquicentennial. Yep. Okay, so again, I want to thank you for coming, and I want you to feel free to come out and join us for some Civil War time cake. It's new, it's fresh. There's also, Bonnie alluded to, there's also some hardtack out there, which was a kind of a military staple at that time. So take that and try it. And there's also a sheet out there on the history of hardtack, just so you get a little feeling for what it is. Just need to warn you before you go out for any cake that the cake does not have nuts, has lots of raisins, and it's not gluten-free. I have a feeling in 1860 they weren't even thinking about gluten-free. So we want to thank you for coming tonight. I hope you enjoyed it.